Okay, we're back again. We're going to do something different this time. First, quickly, if you left me a comment either on YouTube or BitChute or anything like that, and I haven't responded to you, it's just because I didn't see your comment because I don't have enough time to deal with it because I've got a lot going on right now. Be that as it may, we've got to move forward. So what we're going to do today is going to explain to you something that I came up with after encountering the work of Jonathan Bowden. Someone linked me one of his speeches on one of the last videos I did. I think it might have been the one that YouTube banned for hate speech. But at any rate, you need to go check out Jonathan Bowden's huge catalog of speeches, public speeches online if you don't know about him. He is definitely, or he died in 2012, so he was one of the most highly intellectual and articulate speakers and scholars, I guess, political activists on our half of the ideological continuum. And listening to his stuff really helped me crystallize some thoughts that I had. So I'm going to talk about this thing that I'm calling 5 levels of analysis, and this came about through listening to his lecture on Heidegger. And Heidegger, as you know, you can go look up his history. We won't talk about him, but his project, his major book, was called Being and Time. So he's dealing with these two fundamental concepts in, I don't know, human experience. What is what is being and what is time? And the way that Jonathan Bowden described this was that Heidegger, before he could really get down to brass tacks with his philosophy, he had to get through thinking about thinking. So he's got a couple hundred pages in his major work, preparatory material, that is defining what the project is, how we're going to go about it, and what the tools are, and then justifying those tools. And so I started thinking about this, and thinking about all the people that we listen to, the people that we read, and we ourselves and the way that we carry on. And I tried to come up with a categorization for how people make their arguments and just generally the kind of argumentation that people I encounter are using. So we're going to start off with the first level, called it personal. So this is dealing with individuals as such, dealing with yourself and others. Everybody starts out looking at other people, and then hopefully at some point in their life they develop the ability to look inward and do some kind of psychological or biographical analysis of themselves, figure out what their motivations are, rather than just being led around like an animal by their base desires. And, you know, with a lot of underdeveloped human beings or semi-human beings, you see that they look at everything in terms of individual people. So for them, history is just a set of biographies of famous individuals, or politics is something like, you know, I like Ike, I hate Trump. You know, everything's just totally personalized. That's what the first level is. Everything's totally personalized. You're looking at individual people's biographies and psychological motivations. So then we're going to move up to the next level, next 2 levels, and those are the group level and the metaphysical level. The metaphysical level is the kind of stuff that Heidegger was doing. It's the kind of stuff that religious people do. You're looking at the nature of being itself. What is the universe and why is the universe? What is matter? What is energy? What are the roles of these things? And it ends up inevitably being religious, rather because to try to answer questions, you have to come up with these deep ideas that science can't deal with. So, you know, science can always tell you what something is, but it can't tell you why something is. And so all of those questions go in the metaphysical realm. This is what philosophy and religion are contained in that. On the other side over here is group analysis, and that is taking numbers of persons, seeing what they have in common, what they have about them that's different, and the behaviors of groups of people rather than just individuals. So when we get to that point, we're talking about maybe ethnic groups, races, political parties, trade unions, all of these kinds of groups of people that rise above the personal level. The next one is the state. The state is an agglomeration of different groups of humans, and it pursues activities that are outside of the possibility of groups to deal with. Because once groups, once they get over a certain size, they can't really be managed effectively anymore, and they start to take on different characteristics. They have institutional life that may go on for 50, 100, 200 years, much longer than you would think about labor unions or insurance companies or guilds, or just a lot of human experience. Once it gets to a certain level, it becomes political rather than just economic and cultural. So this is what I would call the state level. And then finally, the highest level is civilizational. And so this is controversial because as we move away from the personal level, these things get more and more ephemeral. They're harder to put your finger on, and people just kind of tend to blither about them. So there's no problem convincing you that you exist or that another person exists. But once we get to groups, we will start to lose legitimacy. States the same way, civilizations, most human beings probably don't even know what a civilization is, or they couldn't articulate it. They just think about a work of art that defines a civilization, like the pyramids or some Greek sculpture, something like that. So this is really, the civilizational component is a combination of the state and the metaphysical. So we're moving beyond just what can be observed with your eyes to something greater that would be shared by multiple states, that there's different contributions going into it, and maybe when the civilization is in decline, that means the states are too. I don't know. So these are these 5 levels that I came up with. I didn't get this from anyone else. I just thought it through myself. But as you know, in any kind of intellectual endeavor, you are indebted to probably everything you've ever read, whether you liked it or not. You're just stuck with all of that intellectual baggage that you've accumulated on your journey. So I don't know where all this came from, but this is me reacting to Bowden talking about Heidegger, and another lecture that Bowden did on the European New Right. He referred to the European New Right as rejecting what he called the conspiratorial analysis, and rather picking up on the civilizational analysis. And so if you think about what that means in terms of what we do and what we're interested in, he's basically talking about the Jews. Okay, the Jews and the Freemasons. So the European New Right is going to move away from the Jews and the Freemasons and instead look at civilizations. So that's, I think, hopefully, without me having to get too explicit about this, you see why I came up with this typology. Because you will find people who you essentially agree with on the kind of world that they want to bring about, but you and they disagree about the root causes, and therefore you disagree about the solutions. But this typology is supposed to allow me, and maybe you too if you're interested, to think about the kind of arguments that people are making. Which one of these categories do they fall into, and what does that mean for any type of future method of attack, any type of political program? So now I'm going to give you some practitioners of these different methods as I see it, just to try to fill this out and make it as clear as possible for you. So we're going to go in the same order, I think, and look at the personal level first. 2 people that I came up with for this are E. Michael Jones, particularly before the year 2000, and then also one of my 2 favorite authors, Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky. So if you read E. Michael Jones's books before the Jewish Revolutionary Spirit, and then even some of his later work as well, it's heavily biographical. He looks at individuals, and he figures out the psychological motivation for these individuals in how the story takes place. So history, the stuff that happens in the world, is the result of the psychological motivations of individuals. This seems to be the case for both of these guys. Now, they're both religious too, and they both also comment on civilizations and states and groups. So they're not exclusively in the personal or psychological category, but I feel like this is where they're most at home. This is where if they didn't have bigger questions to deal with, they would be most comfortable dealing with those issues. They're not theologians. They're not amateur psychologists, but psychologists that aren't institutionalized and accredited, and they're both very good at it, in my opinion. At the group level, okay, you can't see that, but it's the text says political science and sociology, and the picture is of Abbé Barwell, Augustin Barwell. And he was the guy who, in the aftermath of the French Revolution, wrote the history of Jacobinism and explained to us and everyone else how the Jacobins did the French Revolution, what was the motivation of this group, what were the conspiratorial activities. So this is what caused me to come up with this typology, because we've got this great example from history of this man who wrote this very important work of how conspiratorial activity changed the world forever. And then we have Jonathan Bowden in his lecture on the European New Right saying that the European New Right reject the conspiratorial as an explanation for world history. So, you can bring in your contributions from any one of these levels, and your contributions can be true and correct, but will it necessarily have superiority or predominance over any one of these other levels? I'm not really sure. But somebody like the Abbé Barwell did enhance our understanding of world history by bringing in this conspiratorial element. So anybody who's dealing with secret societies, Illuminati, Frankists, whatever it happens to be, that's what you're really doing. State, that's Halford Mackinder, the father or the modern father of the geopolitical tradition. The text there says international relations and geopolitics. And so what he's doing is he's looking at this balancing act between states. So we're moving up a level from looking at groups, we're looking at states. How do the states interact with each other? More or less apart from their culture or their history, and just in the power positioning sense. And this explains a lot of the weird stuff that we looked at in my series, Unfinished right now, of the pre-war origins of the post-war order, where you have liberal democratic France making an alliance with the Soviet Union in the 1930s against potentially Germany and Britain, just for instance. Things that you wouldn't expect so much from culture or politics, but from geopolitics, it makes perfect sense. And let's see, who else have we got? Hold on just a second. Be right back. Okay, sorry about that. I had a telemarketer call. Now in this highest category, I've got pictures of Oswald Spengler and also Friedrich Nietzsche. And so what these two guys were doing is trying to explain the philosophy. They were offering a philosophy of history and of civilizations. So why do things take place above the level of states that flow up from deeper things that are perhaps unseen, subconscious, and yet affecting basically the activity of every single person in a society in some way? So that's the deepest and highest level, in my opinion. And those are two guys that, come to my mind when I think about that level of stuff. That level of analysis, rather. And then at the level of metaphysic, you've got Plato, Augustine, for instance, everyone who's operating in the metaphysical or religious tradition, because you're explaining these things, like I just said, that are operating within and among all human beings in a society, and it's the questions of why rather than what and how. Very difficult, perennially interesting, insoluble, stuff that science can't really deal with, and gives me the shivers when I see people who worship science and worship technology who can't seem, I don't know, I think maybe they're just missing a part of their brain. They're missing the metaphysical part. And then of course there's other people who have too much interest in metaphysics and no interest in practical stuff. But you can't separate this out. Anything that's going to grab a large number of people has got to incorporate the metaphysical questions, because those are things that just never go away, and they're always have to be answered in some form or another. Every ideology, every worldview has to deal with those questions. Okay, so these are the five levels, and these are some of the people that I think are representative of commonly dealing with them. And particularly the politics is pretty much all divided up between like Barwell and Mackinder. Everybody working in political science and sociology, everybody in political science is over here between these two guys. Sociology and psychology goes between the first two groups. Religion and ethics is caught up between psychology and metaphysics, and philosophy of culture is caught up between over here and maybe a little bit down here. So these are these levels I came up with. And then the practical application for us is, since we have some things that we don't like and that we want to get rid of and that we want to move past, how does this take place? What does this look like in our circles, for instance? And so let's say we've got the 5 levels here, and who are the enemies based on which of these levels you're working from? If you're looking at the personal level, you're going to identify individuals like Hillary Clinton, George Soros, whichever monsters the Democratic Party in the United States has drug out of the gutter for this presidential cycle. All of the elite Jewish pedophiles who are always in the news. If you're in Europe, it's going to be people who are running the European Union, or it's going to be Angela Merkel, whatever. At the group level, you're going to identify these pernicious organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations, for instance. They're one of the big ones in the mid to late 20th century that people really focused on as being a feeder organization for the worldwide elite. And then in terms of states, communism and the USSR in particular, pretty much everybody recognized that from 1921 until its collapse, a lot of people in the West said this is the existential enemy. This is the threat to our capitalist, free market, liberal, social way of life. And from the metaphysical angle, you can just identify your pet religious opponent, whether it's Muslims or Christianity, I'd say, are the two most popular enemies for people to pick on in Western societies. And then, of course, the Jews as well. And, certain neo-pagan groups would say that it's all 3 of these. It's the Abrahamic religions. Or if you are a militant science-worshipping atheist, then you would say religion in general or metaphysics in general is the problem. And I would accuse you of missing a critical piece of your brain if you said that. Okay, and then finally, I've got just a little pastiche picture down here of the Laocoon German cathedral and the inside of the Bodleian Library. So this is Western civilization, broadly defined, and that would be the enemy for our enemies. The question the difficult question is, how much of this Western civilization do we absolutely need? How much is going to survive over the next 100, 200 years? But destroying this stuff is definitely the goal of our enemies, at least. And so we're going to have to figure out, how much of this do we want to save? How much of it do we really identify with? And how much of this Western civilization actually produced the problem itself that is now seeking to destroy it? That's kind of the Nietzschean, Spenglerian, Yachian, perhaps even, analysis of things, is that all civilizations have a certain lifespan. They're all going to die at some point, and it is correct and proper and just that they live and then die. So you gotta kind of figure out where do you want to draw your line? What do you want to defend? And so I think we're pretty much done here. If you have any reactions to this, I'd be happy to hear it. Any criticisms or ways you think we could improve this model, or if you don't think it's useful, you can tell me that too. But the reason that I wanted to bring this to your attention is because we're constantly listening to all kinds of different people with different elocutions of sort of similar arguments, but maybe they come at it from the metaphysical angle, which is what the Christians tend to do, for instance, or people like Jonathan Bowden. He, I think, was mostly coming at it from a combination of neo-pagan metaphysical and then the civilizational aspect. The mainstream conservatives and people of a very low level of development are articulating pretty much everything in terms of personal and group dynamics. They like Donald Trump. They hate the quote-unquote Democrats, and that's pretty much all they can think about. That's all they've got the capacity to come up with, and that isn't going to work. I can tell you right now, that's not going to get anybody anywhere. And then just quickly, the example of the state component, the way that you see people talking about this is, it's Russia. Russia's the evildoer, and oh my God, if we could only get rid of Russia, the world would be a utopia forever. Alternatively, Israel, that would be another one. Israel's responsible for all the wars in the world, just as another comparison to another level of state analysis. So I think that's all I've got to say. Thank you for hanging in there with me, and I'll hopefully talk to you again soon.